and welcome to the Skillful podcast, where we explore DBT and RODBT skills to help you reduce emotional suffering, improve your relationships, and become more present in your life. I'm your host, Marielle Berg, a psychotherapist at the Bay Area DBT and Couples Counseling Center. So welcome back, Ed.
Thank you.
Today, we are going to be expanding on our interpersonal effectiveness skills. In our last episode, episode 5, we discussed the core interpersonal effectiveness skill in DBT, which is a long acronym, and the acronym is DEARMAN. And I thought that we should start today by just doing a quick review for listeners, because it's a lot of letters to remember.
Yes.
And it might be especially helpful when we're doing skills that have acronyms. And the two we're going to be talking about today also are acronym full. To have a skills book in front of you if you're interested. So we're working out of the DBT skills training handouts and worksheets by Marsha Linehan. And there you'll find all the skills that we're talking about. And you can see the acronyms, which can be helpful to kind of see that in front of you.
Yeah, I find it really, even now, still sometimes hard to remember, wait, what are all these letters standing for? So yeah, it's helpful to have it in front of me.
Okay, so let's do a quick review of DEARMAN, because this is our core or foundational skill of all the interpersonal effectiveness skills. So it's basically a script that you use when you want to ask for something from someone, or you want to say no, or you want to resolve a conflict, or get your opinion taken seriously. Do you want to get us started off on the DEAR part?
Sure. So the DEAR is basically what you say. So you would deliver a DEAR to someone when you need to ask for something or say no. And the D stands for describe what it is that you want to talk about. The E stands for express your feelings or opinions about what you want to talk about. The A stands for assert. So assert what you want. Ask for something, say no, assert what it is that you want from the other person. And then the R in DEAR stands for reinforce, which I think is always important to emphasize that the reinforce is reinforcing what's in it for the other person to give you what you want. So not reinforcing what you're asking, but reinforcing why it benefits them to give you what you want, because I think it's more effective if someone can see that there's a benefit to them in giving you what you're asking for.
Right. And sometimes the reinforce is pretty simple. It could just be like, I'll be a happier partner or employee or something like that. So don't think that it has to be some major reinforcement. Like if you do this for me, I'll do that for you.
Right.
If that doesn't actually exist.
Exactly.
And then the MAN part, the M stands for stay mindful. And so there's two pieces to the stay mindful piece. One is around something that's called a broken record, which is when, let's say, for example, you are asking your significant other to take out the garbage. So you go through the whole DEAR, you describe, you express, you assert, you reinforce, and then they come back with, well, you never do your chores, or you didn't do your dishes the other week. And if you respond to that, you're going to go down a whole other road. So the stay mindful, the broken record, is to just keep asking for what you want. Okay, I understand that. Let's talk about that later. I still would like you to take out the garbage. Kind of doing your ask over and over. And related to that is ignoring attacks. So you didn't do the dishes when you were supposed to is an attack of sorts. It's going to make the whole conversation go in a different way, which can lead you really far away from what the original request was. So those are the two pieces of staying mindful. The A is appearing confident. So you want to make eye contact. You want to use a confident tone of voice. You don't want to be sort of slumping or looking apologetic or stammering or whispering. And the N, lastly, which comes up in all our interpersonal relationships, is to negotiate. So being willing to give to get and thinking about focusing on what will work rather than solely getting your way. So that's a review of the DEARMAN skill. And I wanted us to start our episode today with that because we're going to go into some refinements of how to deliver your dear man, how to ask for something, how to say no, how to resolve a conflict when different things are important. And maybe we should start, Ed, with us talking about this whole concept of like, is your objective the most important? Is your relationship the most important? Or is your self-respect the most important in an interaction?
And what I appreciate about the interpersonal effectiveness skills in DBT is that they really encourage us to plan ahead when we need to ask for something or say no or interact with someone to get what we want in a relationship. It asks us to kind of think ahead and be a little bit planful so that it's not just jumping into, I really need you to do this, or I want you to stop doing that, or whatever it might be. But to think about, okay, so what is it that I want from this interaction? What do I want from this other person in this specific instance? Not necessarily what do I want overall in the relationship, just what is the specific thing that I want when I'm going to address this problem right now. And that's my objective. That's what I'm trying to achieve, is I want to get what I want. And sometimes that's really the most important thing, is the other person is doing something that we really don't like and we want them to change, and we really need to be clear about what we want them to do. But sometimes we want to ask for something important, but we also want to put a lot of emphasis on maintaining the relationship. The relationship is really important, and we don't want to jeopardize the relationship by asking for what we want. So there's a whole different set of skills that we would use to make sure that in clearly asking for what we want, which is always important, we're also being attentive to the relationship. And then at the same time, our self-respect may also be something that's really important. And sometimes maintaining our self-respect is the most important thing when we're interacting with another person. So that we need to ask for something that's important. Maybe the relationship is important, but really what we want to focus on is maintaining our self-respect, that's a high priority for us. So in any given interaction, either our objective, getting what we are asking for, maintaining the relationship, or maintaining our self-respect could be the highest priority. And we use different skills based on which one is the highest priority.
Great. Thank you for explaining that so clearly. I want to say just a couple more things related to this idea, because our objective, the relationship, and our self-respect all always matter. So they're all always on the table. So sometimes someone might think, well, the relationship with a person at a store, if I'm trying to return something, that doesn't matter. I can go and do this return in any way I want, because who cares about the relationship? But I would say, if you want to shop in that store again, or for your own self-respect, there's a way to do that return that doesn't trash the relationship, that brief relationship you have with that person, and certainly doesn't trash your self-respect. So they're all always important. It's just a matter of which is more important. And then let's also talk just a little bit about some of the pitfalls that folks can find themselves in if they do things like always prioritizing relationship or always prioritizing self-respect.
Right. Or always prioritizing getting what they want.
Right. All of them.
That while all three factor into any interaction we have with someone else, different ones have different priorities, and we need to be sure that we're not ignoring any one of those as well. So for instance, if we find ourselves often prioritizing the relationship and wanting to make sure to maintain the relationship, wanting to stay on good terms with the person, oftentimes we can censor ourselves in being clear in asserting what we want. We can assume that the way to maintain the relationship is not to ask for too much.
Or not to say no.
Or not to say no, right? Or to be very, very
agreeable, conciliatory, right?
Yeah, being very agreeable, always trying to be pleasant when we're asking for something. And when that happens, if we are prioritizing not asking for too much, not saying no, always being pleasant, we can actually then not prioritize getting what we need. And over time, that can build up. So we find ourselves in a situation where we get fed up with this imbalance in the relationship. And either we explode and just go off on the other person because we're fed up with taking so much of their concern into so much of their feelings into concern for us, or we can just end the relationship and run away.
Because we're so fed up or
We're so fed
exasperated.
up. And so that's where oftentimes when people find themselves either exploding or just ending relationships suddenly, usually it's because we were swallowing too much in the relationship and not speaking up and saying what was really on our mind.
Right. So people who always prioritize a relationship over other important things, they can think in the moment, or you can feel like you're doing the right thing for the relationship, but it almost always backfires. So it's not helpful. And then let's talk a little bit about folks who almost always prioritize their self-respect.
Right. Yeah. And I think that sometimes where I see this coming up a lot is when people feel like they've been disrespected continually in relationships, can really put a lot of priority on maintaining their self-respect, which I think can be really valuable, especially if you feel like you haven't been respected in relationships in the past. I think the difficulty comes is if we say, I don't care what the other person thinks, and we are consistently saying, it doesn't matter what they think, it doesn't matter even if I get what I want, I am going to stand up for myself, I am going to maintain my self-respect. Well, we can become very ineffective in that way and either lose relationships because we're being too inflexible, or we can be really ineffective at getting what we want because people don't want to give it to us because we're being so forceful in what we're asking in order to maintain self-respect.
Right.
So in DBT, we're always trying to strike a balance. We don't want to be too heavy on one side or another, always.
Right. So that's the dialectic piece. And I love that you mentioned that for folks who find themselves in the camp of prioritizing their self-respect over other important things, that it's usually coming from a place of not being respected or anticipating that their wants and needs and asks and no's won't be respected. I was going to say they sort of come out like guns blazing, like ready for the fight and to have their self-respect be number one.
And I think for most of us, we have learned over the course of our lives to be prepared for the things that have not worked in the past. So if we have been really anxious about being rejected or being abandoned, we can put too much emphasis on trying to maintain the relationship. If we have felt like we have been disrespected and not had our concerns considered by other people, we can be heavy on trying to maintain our self-respect. If we feel like we have not asked for what we want or need, we can be too heavy on really demanding things from other people. We often are trying to prepare for what's been a problem in the past. In DBT, we're always looking to maintain flexibility. We don't want to get stuck in any one pattern. We want to be able to take each interaction, and this is part of the mindfulness, take each interaction for what it is, and notice what is going to be most effective. So even if I have been chronically disrespected in the past, in this particular interaction, it might be more beneficial to me to put a lot of emphasis on maintaining the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Nicely said. Thank you. So let's dive into the give skill, which is the skill that we use when the relationship is the top priority. And actually, just to be more accurate, we use the DEARMAN, which is, again, the script to ask for something, to say a script to use when you want to say no, when you want to resolve a conflict or get your opinion taken seriously. You do the DEARMAN, but if the relationship is the most important thing in that interaction, the way or the manner in which you approach your DEARMAN involves these different components that go by the acronym of GIVE.
So yeah, the way I think about it is that the give skill is how you deliver your DEARMAN when the relationship is important. So things to consider. So for instance, you would want to be gentle. That's the G in give. So making sure that if you want to maintain the relationship, if the relationship has a high priority, definitely want to approach asking for something by being gentle, not attacking, not making any kinds of threats, like if you don't do this, then I will whatever, not judging the other person. So not going in and saying, like if you were a good person, you would give me what I want.
Or if you really loved me.
Right. Or, you should give me this, right? So being careful about being gentle overall. that we're approaching the person without being too hard on them.
Mm-hmm.
While still, and what I appreciate about all of these skills is while still asking for what we want.
Right. So you
It's
can,
easier to ask for what we want.
because you can be gentle and still be firm.
Correct. Yeah.
I want to just, before we move on, I want to talk just a little bit more about the be gentle.
Great.
Because so you were saying no attacks, no threats, no judging, and also no sneering. So pay attention to things like rolling your eyes or kind of making faces or saying things are stupid, that kind of attitude that we can get into sometimes, which will feel very disrespectful to the other person. And if you've ever tried to ask for something or say no to someone like a significant other or a good friend, and you've come in with attacks or threats or judgments or in a sneering kind of way, you probably know from experience it does not go well.
Right. And I think it's also a good reminder that anytime we're using interpersonal effectiveness skills in DBT, we want to make sure that our stress level is not too high to be effective. So if we're at risk of coming in really anxious or really angry, we're not going to be effective in using the give skills, like being able to be gentle. And that sneering may jump right out without us even realizing it. So we want to be clear that we're going in at a time when we're feeling fairly neutral, maybe a little bit anxious or a little bit angry, but we're not overwhelmed, so that we can still apply these skills and be conscientious about being gentle, for instance.
Right. That's a great point, that these skills in the interpersonal effectiveness module require us to not be full on in emotion mind, because our brains, our prefrontal cortex is just not online enough for us to kind of think through this and have enough self-control and reflection in the moment, have enough mindfulness, I might say, to remember, oh, don't attack or don't threat, even if you're upset. So our suggestion would be, if you're having a conflict with another person and you're super in emotion mind, which we talked about in an earlier episode, which I'll link to in the show notes, that use other skills first to sort of center yourself, ground yourself before you try to use some of these interpersonal effectiveness skills. And as a little side note, so we're going to discuss these skills and you can learn all these wonderful tools to be interpersonally effective, and relationships are complex.
Right.
So we don't want to imply that you just do your DEARMAN, you put, right? And then that's it. Everything goes your way.
How great would that be?
Right. These skills are more a base on which to work. And there's lots of fine tuning that can be done. And there are tons of interpersonal effectiveness skills in DBT. And we're just giving you a little taste here.
Yeah.
So when you're acting interested, this also seems like pretty elementary relationship skills, but it's good to be reminded of it. Listen and appear interested in the other person, because everyone likes that. It feels good. Listen to the other person's point of view. Try to face the person. Don't talk to them while you're not looking at them. That's such a common thing that happens with the couples I work with. They'll be discussing something really important, really intense, and they're facing away from each other. They're not looking at each other. They're just talking. Don't interrupt or talk over the person because you're so eager to make your point. And also, if the person you're talking to says, I'm not in a good space right now, or I'm busy, or whatever it might be, can we talk about this later? Be open and sensitive to that. Timing matters here. So being patient when it's needed. And I think that in DBT, they talk about acting interested, because sometimes we're not actually. You can have a dear friend who is into triathlons and you couldn't care less about triathlons and all the gear and everything that's involved and the times that they made on their last race. But if you care about them, you're going to fake it a little bit.
Right. And I think that, like we have a skill in emotion regulation of opposite action, so that if it's going to be effective, we can do the opposite of what our emotions might be telling us. So this isn't a situation where maybe really trying to be interested even when we're not, help us practice a little bit of opposite action and become more interested. That if we actually put effort into being interested, we will become interested. And that's going to pay off in terms of the other person really feeling like we're prioritizing the relationship, we care about them and this relationship, and more likely to give us what we're asking for.
Exactly. And with the becoming interested by using sort of the opposite action, a thing that can happen, especially if someone you care about is talking about a topic that you really couldn't care less about, is you can garner interest by sort of piggybacking on their excitement, and you care about them. And so they find triathlon gear so exciting. So why don't we move on to the V for validate?
Yeah. So with the give skill, the V is for validate, which is to really show that we understand the other person's feelings and thoughts about the situation that we're talking about. We're trying to validate that their perspective is also important, not just our own. Especially if we have differences of opinion about what we're asking for, or if it might be hard for them to give us what we're asking for, or if it might be hard for them to hear no from us, to validate that that makes sense, that that would be hard for them, that we understand where they are coming from. I think that, being able to say, I realize that this is hard for you, or I recognize that this might be emotional for you. Being able to just reflect what the other person's point of view is and where they're coming from helps them to feel like we care enough to understand them, that we're trying to understand where they're coming from, and that it demonstrates our value for them in the relationship.
Exactly. So we've done the G, the I, and the V of give. So the last letter of this acronym, the E, is easy manner. So you want to think about using an easy manner, which means you can use a little bit of humor, you can smile, be lighthearted, thinking about using a soft sell over a hard sell. So when the relationship is the most important thing, the attitude that we approach the other person when we want to discuss something, if we come in with a certain amount of lightness, it tends to go more smoothly. I think it communicates to the other person that we trust each other. I care about you.
Right. And that it decreases the intensity of what we're asking for, so that we can still ask for what we want without making it like something that's really tense for the other person. And I think that that can help. If the relationship is important, we want to make sure that we can continue to have these kinds of conversations. And if every time we say, I need to talk to you about something really important, that person is going to be kind of worried about talking to us. And so being able to say, hey, something came up that I want to talk to you about, is a very different approach, a much easier approach.
Right. Like, this is not a huge deal.
Right.
It's something I want to talk to you about. And I think when people have a hard time saying no, they might come in to a discussion or do a DEARMAN with a lot of intensity, because saying no is hard.
Right. And again, these are skills that we review, we think about before we go into a conversation, and we need practice. So I know for me, because I can be intimidated to ask for something or say no, like I tend to be maybe a little bit stronger than I need to be. And so preparing ahead helps me to maybe take a little bit of a more gentle and easy approach, and I might not get there. So I need practice.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Before we move on to the skill that we use when self-respect is the most important thing, I want to spend just another moment talking about what it means to have the relationship be the top priority. So some things to think about, or some questions to ask yourself to get clear on what's most important here. Is it my objective? Is it the relationship? Is it my self-respect? Or to ask some of the following questions. So if your objective is the most important thing, you're thinking about, what are the results that I want? So that means asking for the thing you want or need. It means saying no to an unwanted request. It means resolving a conflict or getting your opinion taken seriously, or any of the myriad other things that can happen when the objective is the most important thing. The objective is really about the results that you want in every interpersonal interaction that you have. Do you want to talk some about when the relationship is the most important? What kind of question can you ask yourself to figure out if relationship?
Well, I think the easiest question, because with this, with our DEARMAN and give and fast skills, we're always looking at having one conversation about one specific thing with someone. And so the question that I think is helpful is, how do I want this person to feel about me at the end of this conversation? So not, how do I want this person to feel about me overall? Although that's a valuable thing to think about at times. But for the purposes of using these interpersonal effectiveness skills, it's how do I want this person to feel about me at the end of this conversation? Do I want them to feel like I really took their concerns seriously? Do I want them to feel like I'm really listening to them? Do I want them to feel like I am going to ask for things clearly in the relationship, right? So, like, what do I want the person to feel about me? And then related to that, how do I want to feel about myself as a result of this conversation? So at the end of this, how do I want to feel about myself? Do I want to feel strong? Do I want to feel proud? Do I want to feel a sense of self-efficacy? I can speak up for myself. What's important to me? And by looking at what's my objective, what do I want to get out of this? How do I want the other person to feel about me? And how do I want to feel about myself? That can give us some more clarity about where do I want to put the emphasis? Is it on the relationship? Is it on my self-respect? Is it on achieving my objective? What seems most important?
Yeah, and I don't want listeners to get the sense that these skills are easy or that it's always clear that, relationship is number one or my self-respect is number one, because there's often imbalances and conflicts in priorities. So there's a weighing of options here.
When we talk about these skills in our skills group and we go over people trying to deliver a DEARMAN and reflecting on what's important, the vast majority of the time people are saying they're all three important. It's hard to decide which is most important. I kind of think maybe the relationship of self-respect is also really important. I think that most of the time, all three are important, and it may be hard to sort out which is most important. Trying to think about it may give us a little bit more guidance.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the FAST skill. And so another acronym. So this is a skill to think about when your self-respect is most important. So again, you would do the DEARMAN, your ask, or you're saying no, and you'd want to keep in mind these qualities that are related to the FAST skill.
So the first is to be fair. So the F in FAST stands for fair. So we want to be fair to ourselves and to the other person. But in particular, when self-respect is important, we want to make sure that we're validating our own feelings and wishes. So when the relationship is important, we put a lot of emphasis on validating the other person's point of view. When our self-respect is important, we put a lot of emphasis with being fair to ourselves. What's important to me? What do I need in this situation? So that we're really focusing on that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. And then the next letter in FAST is the A, which is no apologies. So if you're the kind of person who has a hard time advocating for your self-respect and kind of often puts what other people's wants and needs are ahead of your own, you might find yourself over apologizing if you're asking someone to do something like, oh, please could you take out the garbage or give me a call, or do a lot of apologizing if you're going to say no. I'm really sorry. I can't give you a ride home, like padding it in this way because you feel like you don't have the right to be direct about what you want and need or a right to say no. So really thinking about not over apologizing. So no apologizing for making a request at all. To think about how you're coming across. Are you looking ashamed? Are you slumping your posture? Are you, apologizing for disagreeing or having an opinion or being alive?
And I think for some of us, we may have learned that we aren't really supposed to ask for things in relationships. And so apologizing a lot and saying, I'm so sorry to have to ask, or, oh, I know this is so hard, or I'm so sorry to have to say no to you, can become a habit. And if our self-respect is important, that can diminish our self-respect. So being able to be more clear, going into it saying, I'm not apologizing for asking, I'm not apologizing for saying no, I'm going to prioritize what's important to me.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so the next one, would you like to talk about S?
Sure. Yeah. So the next letter in our acronym is S, which stands for stick to values. So stick to our own values. What's important to me? make sure that we are not swayed by the other person to diminish the importance of what's our priority, what's important to us, what are my values. Kind of stick to your guns kind of approach.
Mm-hmm. So the last letter in the FAST skill is to be truthful. So don't lie. Don't act helpless when you're not. Don't exaggerate or make up excuses, because this is a way that self-respect can be really compromised. And this can show up when people feel like they have to lie or do white lies or exaggerate the truth when they're saying no. So make up a story as to why they have to say no instead of just saying no.
Right. In order to maintain self-respect, I think it's really valuable to just say, what is important to me is important to me. I don't need to exaggerate it. I don't need to make my reasons for saying yes or no or asking bigger than they really are. I just state the facts. This is important to me and I stand by it.
Right. Exactly. We've now gone over these 2 ways to think about delivering your dear man, and that includes the give skill when your relationship is the top priority, and the fast skill when self-respect is your top priority.
So yeah, I think it's valuable to reflect on all of this stuff. And again, to reiterate, these interpersonal effectiveness skills take thought and planning and practice. That these are not things that we just are like, oh yeah, the relationship is important, so now I'm going to use give and this is how I'm going to do it. We have to kind of think about it, try it out, reflect on it. I think it's really helpful to talk to a third party about how do we want to approach this to get support, need to reflect on how intensely do we need to ask for what we want. All of these are factors to consider. We don't want to make it seem like, oh yeah, here are some skills, go use them and all your interpersonal relationships are going to be easy.
Exactly. And for listeners, we're hoping that this will give people a taste of some of these skills, but they're quite nuanced. So when we're saying no, we can say no with a lot of firmness, or we can say no with a little bit more lightness or not as much firmness.
Right.
And that matters depending on different things. And these are all things that we go into in our skills group, and that you'll go into if you want to learn the full DBT. So you'll get all the nuances. This is just a little taste of what the skills are like.
Definitely.
Thank you, Ed, for joining me today to talk about these skills.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. To learn more, or if you're in the Bay Area and want to get started with therapy, you can find us online at bayarea.dbtcc.com. That's bayarea.dbtcc.com.